After a 3-year content drought, the Overwatch 2 beta is finally here, and to get things out of the way early, it's really f***ing great. Before we go any further, we should probably talk about the context of Overwatch 2, because Blizzard have been pretty damn terrible at explaining what the game is supposed to be. Overwatch 2 is coming in 2 parts. The first is the PvP mode, which we've already been playing for the past 6 years. This will be entirely free for those who already own Overwatch 1, and will pretty much be a continuation of the team's commitment for releasing regular new maps, heroes, and events. If you already own the game, just consider this as more Overwatch, for no extra cost. The second part is the PvE mode, which will need to be purchased separately. This will be similar to the player versus environment modes that the team have put into the game previously, but much more fleshed out. These will include hundreds of missions, completely unique locations, and entire skill trees for each hero to level up and spec into. This is the same company that made Diablo, so to say they are not already good at this kind of PvE gameplay would be an understatement. If you couldn't give less of a shit about a PvE mode, then you essentially get everything else for free.
I feel alright killing you because I'll never be sexually attracted to you.
Of course, the biggest question is why Blizzard would even announce Overwatch 2 when it's both barely a sequel and it would essentially cut off all content for the game for a whole 3 years. I've talked about this before, but a few years ago, the higher ups at Activision Blizzard began adopting a sequel-based business model for its games, presumably after seeing the wild success of Call of Duty. My headcanon is that on one fateful day, the Blizzard offices heard a knock at the door. Answering the knock, the team would find that they've been visited by none other than Bobby Kotick, who was fresh from paying poor people to fight for his amusement. He would then announce that although Overwatch was the only multiplayer game in the past 3 console generations to win Game of the Year, all development would cease to begin working on Overwatch 2. He would then do a flip before punching a woman in the face on the way out of the building. The developers, knowing how fucking stupid this was for a live service game, decided to see this as an opportunity to get everything they ever wanted. They would keep working on the PvP section as usual. They'd start work on the PvE portion in a way they never would have been able to do before, and they'd begin hoarding content like no tomorrow. Long requested features like different weather, a ping system, entirely reworked heroes, guilds, and a visual overhaul would now all be possible, and all they had to do is pretend they were working on a sequel and not a fucking enormous expansion. Along comes the Overwatch Alpha, and the team can finally show off a glimpse of their vision for the future, with a bunch of new maps, the new 5v5 game format, the new push game mode, and the new hero, Sojourn. It should be noted that the team have previously stated that they want to make content releases much more frequent when they finally release the game, so the lack of new heroes is very much so they can keep a steady stream after the initial release. I've mentioned this before, but by looking at the team's previous development schedule, they could theoretically release a new hero every 2 months for 2 straight years, if that's the retention strategy they wanted to employ. But it will be interesting to see how they intend to execute these releases. With the context out of the way, let's get into the gameplay. Firstly, the 5-man teams consisting of a single tank absolutely work wonders for the game's format. Overwatch as a game has tried a multitude of team variations to finally land in this position, but this really feels like the sweet spot. Damage dealers are able to do their job more effectively with one less tank to get in the way. Supports don't just feel like heal bots and can actually go for a lot more aggressive plays, and tanks actually feel like really powerful heroes that are supposed to be stronger than everyone else. Half the roster have been reworked in one way or another, and to do them all justice, I'm going to be covering them all individually, starting with damage dealers. Firstly, every role now gets a unique passive, with DPS heroes all moving 10% faster. This generally makes damage dealers more deadly, but it also makes them slightly harder to hit when they are strafing like a motherfucker. Starting with the new hero Sojourn. She very much feels like Soldier if he was remade in the current year. Sojourn is equipped with a slide, which can be used as a jump boost, a DOT grenade, which acts as area denial, a hit scan assault rifle, and a railgun. which can one-shot squishes to the head. The way the railgun works is that players need to deal damage with Sojourn's assault rifle to charge up her secondary fire, which can be discharged at any time to release all the currently stored energy. Her ultimate is straightforward in that it automatically charges the railgun on your behalf, allowing players to dump damage incredibly quickly without the need to charge up. I expect Sojourn to be especially deadly at higher ranks, as with her one-shot potential, you never quite know whether you're one click away from being one-shot from full health. Moving on to renamed Cowboy Man, and his flashbang is no more. However, Tracer players shouldn't rejoice just yet, as he's also equipped with a mini pulse bomb that homes in on enemies, dealing just over 130 damage. I expect this change will do very little to make him any stronger or weaker, but rather just makes him less frustrating to play against. This change is in line with the developers wanting to scale back on crowd control abilities, because in Overwatch 2, hard stuns are now exceptionally rare. Another interesting change is that while channeling his ultimate, he also gets a 40% damage reduction, which is bound to make original McCree enjoyers very happy. Combined with nano boost, and his damage reduction is almost cut in half, making him even stronger when CC and barriers have been dramatically toned down. We now come to Mei, who for the first time ever, I don't outright hate. Her ultimate is still able to freeze enemies, however her primary fire is very much focused more on pure damage, which makes her less frustrating, while also keeping her just as strong. This shit is no slouch either, as it can deal a whole 100 damage per second, punishment that the likes of Symmetra or Zarya would need to actively work towards. Historically, playing against Mei makes me become a worse person, but with this not being the case in Overwatch 2, I see this as an absolute win. Next up is Bastion, who has almost been reworked entirely. His primary fire for Econ mode has now been modified to be slower firing with a longer effective range, while his sentry mode has now been put on a timer, while also giving him shopping cart wheels. His ultimate has now been changed to a Call of Duty kill streak, which is also a lot more fun. Another significant change is that his self-repair ability has been replaced with a grenade, meaning that although he's more deadly, he's also going to need to play more with his team to stay viable. Bastion now feels more flexible in what he's able to do, which very much seems to be the new design philosophy going forward. The days of teammates rage quitting as soon as they see a Bastion on their team may finally be over. The last damage dealer who's undergone a significant change is Sombra, who is now more fluid than ever before. Hack's cooldown has been halved to just 4 seconds and can be executed without having to leave stealth. However, its function has now completely changed. It now only disables abilities for a single second, but it also reveals an enemy's real-time position through walls, as well as increases the damage taken from Sombra herself by 40%. Mixed with Sombra's reduced gun spread, and she now becomes very deadly in the right circumstances. One feature that the player base has yet to embrace is the ping system, and with Sombra always in the backline, with line of sight to the enemy, it seems as if she might be the biggest beneficiary to this feature. This isn't even mentioning her insane new ultimate. Sombra's EMP has always been pretty strong, but it's now arguably better than ever. It now reveals all enemies caught through walls, as well as strips away 40% of their current health, meaning stacked with your own 40% damage bonus, you should be able to finish a few of them off, even without your team piling in. Sombra has always been an opportunist in her playstyle, but now more than ever is where we see her kit shine. She can now lie in wait to cancel a crucial ability at the right time, which when used properly, can really fuck up an enemy's plans and leave them with no way to effectively recover. As it currently stands, Sombra is now my favorite damage dealer in Overwatch 2, and I can't wait to play her with the coordination of a full team. We haven't talked about every damage dealer, but this covers everyone who was lucky enough to receive a rework. I tried playing a bit of Symmetra during the beta, but in all honesty, I still think she should just be reworked as a support, like it was always intended. We now get to the tanks, which are unquestionably the most different. All tanks now get passive knockback resistance, as well as generating 30% less ultimate charge, for both the enemies chipping you down, and your teammates healing you up. We should first start with Reinhardt, who actually feels fucking excellent to play. Rein now gets 2 fire strikes, a charge he can cancel at any time, a hefty health increase, and a slight nerf to his barrier, to compensate for the 5-man teams. Reinhardt went from being Rectangle Man in Overwatch 1 to being the tank Reinhardt thinks he is when he looks in the mirror. Proper team saving barriers in Overwatch 2 have become exceptionally rare, with only 3 heroes in the entire game having them readily available, meaning putting Rein's shield up for any amount of time genuinely feels both special and powerful. With this in mind, his Earth Shatter is the real winner for this change, as it actually feels how it does in the cinematics. Not only are you likely to immediately kill anyone point blank, but the lack of barriers means you don't have to play 4D fucking mind games just to get past the 2 tank barriers constantly in your way. Reinhardt feels like an absolute giga chad, and after years of getting barrier cucked and stun locked into oblivion, he deserves a game worthy of his title. The same can't be said for D.Va, who apart from a health increase, was left mostly unchanged. Her defense matrix is admittedly much better than before, with around a 50% uptime, but this is really only to compensate for her being the only tank. D.Va has always been an off tank, who specializes in diving with damage dealers and bailing out backline supports, but without a second tank to act as the front line, she really tends to suffer. She's not necessarily weak. However, it just might be hard to justify picking her over the many more robust options available. Moving on to our thick boy Roadhog, who just got a whole lot thicker. Our favorite competitive Vapor now rocks 700 health, with his take a breather ability now restoring a whole 350 at a time, meaning just like before, he's still a better healer than Zen. Much like Overwatch 1, Roadhog just feels like a fat DPS, and his overall effectiveness is going to dramatically depend on your hookshot percentage. Winston is a hero I'd currently place in the underwhelming category, as although he gets a better barrier and a ranged attack, he really didn't seem to compete with some of the more Chad offerings. His secondary fire especially needs something to make it scarier. This could be as simple as giving it a bigger crack in the audio department, or even letting the ranged shot chain from one enemy to the next at reduced damage. Whatever the case, it currently feels unsatisfying to use, and in a game like Overwatch, that in itself is a cardinal sin. We now get to Sigma, who can finally live up to his name as a dominant Sigma male. As one of the few heroes equipped with a shield, he now feels much stronger by default, meaning he can now get back to dominating beta males and blocking any advances from cringe women who try to interrupt his grind. His kit itself has undergone the bare minimum change, with his health increased, his barrier capacity lowered, and his rock now dealing a whole 100 damage. This is the same Sigma, but he's obviously spent the last 3 years working on his grind set. Next up is Wrecking Ball, who has a special place in my heart. Ball himself is almost entirely unchanged, but he's now even more impossible to kill, with his health being increased to 700 at base, and with one less person per team, he's even tankier than ever before. On top of this, armor now provides a flat damage resistance of 30%, meaning his effective health is now closer to 750. If this wasn't enough, all temporary shield and armor health pools have now been converted into green overhealth, which doesn't provide any ultimate charge for depleting. This means that when faced with the whole enemy team, Wrecking Ball can give himself an extra 500 health immediately, which provides no ultimate charge, on top of his 150 armor that takes 30% less damage, and his 550 health which can still be healed at any time by his healers. Not only this, but because of the role passive, Wrecking Ball will also provide 30% less ult charge if you do manage to wear him down. But with reduced crowd control, this is made even more difficult. Whether being both by far the most mobile and most tanky hero is enough to let him compete with other more versatile tanks is difficult to say, but on paper, our teenage hamster friend is looking mighty strong in the sequel. Moving on, we have our old friend, Zarya, who like many other heroes, just becomes a more flexible version of herself. the world's strongest woman, now gets slightly more health and has a pool of 2 bubbles she can distribute however she sees fit. Both bubbles now last half a second longer, but because they both charge from the same ability slot, her uptime tends to be lower on average. When I played a few rounds, the lack of a second tank tended to make me more inclined to bubble myself more often, as usually I was the one getting the most shit slung in my direction. I expect as opposed to a more supportive role, Funny Bubble Woman will now be making a lot more plays on her own terms. In a fucking fantastic change, Doomfist has now been moved to the tank category, making him less reliant on one-shot combos and more of an area of effect menace. As someone who loves playing Ana, Doom has been the bane of my fucking existence ever since he came out. If you're a backline support without mobility, you only get to live for as long as Doomfist chooses to allow. In Overwatch 2, Doomfist is a tanky motherfucker, but he has to work a lot harder to secure picks, because in the end, that's not really his role. His slam and uppercut have been combined into a Winston leap move, but he also gets a block, which can now supercharge his next rocket punch. In all honesty, a supercharged punch is still significantly weaker than it was before, as even fully charged, you still couldn't one-shot a tracer if you slam them against a wall. However, it can now affect multiple targets at the same time. In terms of his ultimate, it now deals far less damage than before, but it also inflicts a harsh slowdown, meaning it's more used to set up combos, as opposed to finish a fight outright. As someone who's played very little Doomfist in my time, he certainly feels much more forgiving to play, and as a tank, there's much less pressure to directly convert picks, as opposed to set them up on behalf of your team. We now come to Orisa, who has received the biggest change of any hero in the sequel. I've previously gone on record saying I'd rather shit in my hands and clap than play Orisa for a single round, but she's now unironically my favorite tank. Gone are the days of unloading a pea shooter from behind a barrier for the entire game while charging up what is essentially a passive ultimate. Horse bitch is now actually fun.
Swag, watch this, watch. Alright?
For optimal chance of survival,
Orisa gameplay.
Orisa has gone from being the most boring brain dead piece of shit to play to becoming Doom guy levels of aggressive. Her primary gun is now thankfully on an overheat system, so no more waiting for the ice caps to melt while trying to reload. Her barrier has been replaced with a move taken straight from General Grievous, which gives her increased movement speed, eats all projectiles, pushes back enemies, and deals up to 90 damage. Fortify has been changed slightly, as instead of a straight damage reduction, Orisa instead gets overshields and reduces heat generation of her weapon. The best new ability is a fucking spear, which can be pegged across the map, stuns enemies for a fraction of a second, deals 80 damage on impact, and an extra 40 if the enemy comes in contact with a wall. I've often said that it's not enough for a hero to be fun to play, but they need to be genuinely cool, and with an ability like this, Orisa has gone from a glorified lollipop lady to the motherfucker they sent to kill Sarah Connor. Her ultimate is also really fucking fun to use, as you channel an area attack around yourself before unleashing the largest amount of damage you can get away with dealing. Overall, Orisa is fucking outstanding, and if this is the kind of design philosophy they've got in store for their banked up supply of new heroes, it's going to be a very bright future ahead. One point that doesn't seem to be talked about very much, however, are the specific hero pools of each player. For example, in Overwatch 1, my blind spot was usually Reinhardt, but because I'd usually play with a Reinhardt main anyway, I'd know that at least one of us could play that hero competently when we were both playing tank. In Overwatch 2, tank blind spots will no longer be able to be covered, and it's not yet clear how this will affect how a team might function. In a perfect world, no tank will be meta enough for this to ever be a problem, but as history shows, some heroes have previously been must picks for up to 4 months at a time. I might be making a big deal out of a problem that doesn't even exist, but the fastest way to kill any enjoyment for this game is for an entire role to be made up of the same hero every single match. We'll be getting into the supports and other concerns in a moment, but first, it's time to get blindsided with a sponsor. Viewers watching a video like this probably have some bulky gaming headphones, but when you're not throwing games as Hanzo, you might be looking for something a bit more subtle. Luckily, Raycon's everyday wireless earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever before. These things fit so well that anything short of a punch to the face won't knock them out, and their 8-hour playtime and 32-hour battery life means you can take these things halfway round the world on a single charge. Not only are they half the price of other premium earbuds, but Raycon also boast a whopping 49,000 5-star reviews. Raycons also let you tailor your listening experience depending on what you're doing. For example, if you're listening to a podcast on a train, you can set it to noise isolation to block out external sounds, while also tuning them to the pure sound mode to keep spoken voices clearer than ever. The good news is that even if you're 1% unsatisfied, Raycon will let you return them for a full refund within 30 days, meaning if you're already in the market for a new pair of earbuds, this is a risk-free purchase. Going to buyraycon.com/surswag will get you another 15% discount, or just click on the link in the description like a normal fucking person. Raycon, the YouTuber's choice.
If you don't have coriander with your cornflakes, don't even talk to me.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
Your opinion is invalid.
Of all 3 roles, supports certainly got the short end of the stick, which is very much within Blizzard's design philosophy. With this in mind, they did get arguably the best role passive, with all of them now being able to self-heal after being out of combat for a second. This affects some heroes more than others, but we'll get to that later. Supports in the Overwatch 2 beta received very little changes to themselves, so their place in the meta is very much dictated by the strength of other heroes, as well as the new 5v5 format. To start, let's look at our favorite vaccine distributor, Ana, who I've personally put more hours into than any other hero in the game. The passive healing on Ana feels fucking fantastic. As before, you'd have to spend half your biotic nades keeping yourself topped up, but now, you can just sit behind cover for a few seconds and ignore any chip damage altogether. This means you tend to use way more aggressive nades than ever before, which in an ideal world is what you want to be doing every time anyway. It also means she's able to fend off flankers much more easily, because by just splashing a Genji with a jar of piss, he'll be forced to think twice about annoying you again. It should also be noted that Ana is now one of the only heroes who gets to keep her crowd control ability, meaning her playmaking potential is now going to be as significant as ever. All of this, combined with supports now being expected to play more offensively, and we could soon see a new golden age for typical Ana enjoyers going forward. In what might be the single biggest change to bring players back to the game, Brig is no longer a stun goblin. Her shield bash now deals 50 damage and is able to trigger Inspire, which personally seems like a pretty good trade-off. Just having a barrier at all makes her much more formidable in the context of Overwatch 2, and the extra bash damage can really add up when you start throwing it into larger combos. Brig also benefits greatly from the support passive, more than you might think. If she gets jumped, she can just bash once, hide behind her shield, and immediately be regenerating at 30 HP per second. She can now literally give herself the equivalent of Zen's healing orb for dealing any amount of damage, meaning if you're sick of getting dived, Brig might be the answer to all your prayers. There isn't much to say about Baptiste in all honesty. The smaller team sizes don't exactly enhance his kit, as he's someone who benefits the most from having his team grouped together as much as possible. The 30% reduction in ultimate generated by healing tanks, along with one less tank per team, also tends to hurt his ult generation potential. Baptiste players who like being more aggressive will be able to do this more often, but otherwise, he feels pretty mid-tier. This is in stark contrast to Lucio, who is the strongest motherfucker around. With the support self-healing passive, he now essentially gets both speed and self-heal at the same time. Pairing this with the lack of crowd control and half-decent Lucio players are literally bullying damage dealers in the backline. It's no secret that Lucio has always been a solid pick, with how easy it is to produce value, but he's now become oppressive in a way that's made his counterparts uncompetitive. Froggy Man certainly needs to be toned down, but otherwise, he still feels as fun as ever. We now come to Old Reliable, with Mercy. With all supports now getting Mercy's old self-healing ability, the developers decided to give Mercy herself a supercharged version, which provides 50% more than her contemporaries. Chip damage is now a mere inconvenience to the Swiss Rule 34 pioneer, as she just needs to be anything resembling elusive to be at full health almost immediately. Other than this change, she still plays very much the same, so Mercy mains can rejoice that she gets to move to the next game, being slightly better than before. Moira on the other hand, feels really fucking strong. With one less tank to babysit, she can now be more aggressive than ever, and bloodthirsty Moiras from Overwatch 1 were already notorious for outdamaging their entire team. Throw this in with her massive healing potential and a get out of jail free card, and it's no wonder she's been dominating so many matches in the beta. A very comfortable A tier hero as she currently stands. We now get to Zen, who is unfortunately more defenseless than ever before. With teams now running a single tank, mobile bodyguards like D.Va and Winston are far less likely to save a Zen getting dived in the backline, meaning unless you're genuinely much more skilled than your aggressor, getting flanked is usually a one-way ticket to the spawn room. I suspect that his current state is likely adjusted to the feedback from the alpha test, which was populated by literally the best players in the world, but as a filthy casual like myself, playing Zen felt like that meme from Invincible. As it stands, Zen acts as the younger sibling that your mum makes you take somewhere, who will literally die if you leave them alone for more than 10 seconds. One huge buff that wasn't announced for support heroes is that their queue times have also been reduced to absolutely nothing.
Surely we will not get support 3 times in a row.
Oh, you'd think so.
God, these fucking goblins!
In fact, all but one time, when I queued up for a flex role, I was thrown into a match as a support almost immediately, and in all honesty, it's not hard to see why. Since the early days of Overwatch 1, damage dealers have been by far the most popular, as they essentially get to be the hunters, while supports are the hunted, and this is truer than ever in the sequel. It's also no secret that there are significantly more damage heroes than other roles. In fact, in the beta, there were nearly as many damage heroes who got reworked as there are support heroes overall. Tanks themselves have now become more or less fat DPS, and they are almost always the strongest heroes, meaning only having to fill 2 per game is also expected to be pretty achievable. Supports on the other hand, receive no reworks, no new heroes, and have been made more vulnerable than ever in terms of who the enemy team is the most likely to focus. The last support introduced into Overwatch came out in March 2019, almost a year before the words COVID-19 meant anything to anyone. I personally really like playing support, and it's historically been my most played role, but I really didn't enjoy it nearly as much in the Overwatch 2 beta, and I think this is a pretty huge problem going forward. This isn't to say I'm going to complain with any amount of serious weight, because something a lot of people like to conveniently forget is that this is a beta for a reason. I'd have to be missing 2 brain cells to rub together not to know that they're holding back a ton of content for the actual release. The developers haven't spent 3 years to put out a few new maps and a single damage dealer, and I think this light release for the beta all comes down to the game's marketing strategy. To be successful, the launch of Overwatch 2 needs to be truly exciting, fresh, and polished to high heaven. To make this happen, Blizzard have only allowed players to see the maps and reworks they've previously showed off anyway, which allows them to store all that extra content in reserve to keep the hype as high as possible upon release. This is however a double-edged sword, as unlike most of you probably watching, the majority of casual players don't have time to follow Blizzard's business strategies, look out every offhand comment over the last 3 years, or appreciate the multitude of changes that have come with the beta. To most people, Overwatch 2 just looks like the same game, with the same maps, a single new hero, and no PvE mode in sight, which isn't exactly an unfair assessment. In fact, I'm willing to bet that the reason the beta has been selective is because if players are willing to go out of their way to watch a 4-hour stream for beta access, they're probably going to be the type of people who are likely to appreciate the myriad of subtle changes that Overwatch 2 has introduced. The only reason I was even able to play is because an uncle who worked at Blizzard, meaning for the time being, they probably want this to be as tight as possible. The truth of the matter is that although Overwatch 2 is incredibly polished, it's still quite obviously not finished. Some of the text boxes aren't properly sized, there are still voice lines that exist for removed features, and while the base golden weapon skins look fine, a lot of the ones for legendary skins haven't been shined up properly. The scoreboard especially could absolutely use some work, as you can constantly be finding yourself searching for the information you want, as opposed to it being immediately accessible. At the end of the day, this is still the best version of Overwatch we've ever seen, and I don't say that lightly. I've seen people unironically say that the game has never been better than it was at launch, and I can't help think that those people are fucking idiots. Season 1 of Ranked literally had a coin flip system that seemed to determine half of all matches. 6 Torbs was nearly unbeatable on console, and Roadhog could hook you from halfway to fucking Narnia. Don't even get me started about playing as a support. The game launched with 4 different support heroes, 3 of which could actually heal, and 1 of which was considered a throw pick, meaning as a support player, you'd have the option of 2 heroes every fucking match. Most of the time, being a support was just trying to keep 5 other damage dealers topped up, while one of them told you to switch to Mercy, so you could pocket them to victory. Saying that Overwatch was better in the good old days is insane, especially after hundreds of fine-tuned tweaks have made the current version so smooth. I mean, just listen to these fucking weapon sounds. At this point, we are getting into the 30-minute mark, so it's probably time to wrap this up. From what I saw of Overwatch 2, we are absolutely on the right track for the best Overwatch experience ever. At no point in the game's history has each hero felt so fluid, the map pool been so inoffensive, and nearly all roles have been quite this fun. There are still some slight balance issues. The lack of new content isn't going to win over casual players, and convincing people to play support is going to be an uphill battle, but overall, I really fucking love the direction they've gone with this glorified expansion. The developers have already started to address nearly every single concern I've mentioned, even going as far as announcing that they've been working on reworks for a lot of the current support pool, so it's clear they really intend to take player feedback to heart. I haven't felt this enthusiastic to both play and make content about Overwatch for years, and I suspect that as long as people can temper their expectations of what Overwatch 2 actually is, they are going to have a really fucking good time.